So, hello everybody, and welcome back to my channel. I apologize for the lack of recent content. Unfortunately, last week, my cat of 11 years, Apollo, passed away. Um, so, I don't want to make this too morbid. So, for anybody who hasn't been living under a rock, last week, the third episode of The Last of Us premiered. And it was quite possibly the most well written, well directed, and well acted piece of television cinema I may have seen in my life. And I'm not being hyperbolic about that. I don't think something has made me more emotionally connected in a long time. And there's been some really great stuff out there in the last 5 years. So, for people who don't know the video game, a lot of what I'm going to cover may not make sense to you or may go over your head. I really encourage you to either play the game or seek out media on YouTube that goes over the story, the premise of the game, and fleshes out the characters, because it's really an amazing story. An amazing story that's ripe for a streaming service series. Mostly because of stuff that I'm going to cover. So, the third episode of The Last of Us focused on two characters, Bill and Frank. Bill and Frank are gay. So, I'm sure you can imagine, we already know what this is going to be about. No, you don't. So, in the video game, we didn't get much about Bill and Frank. To be clear, what happened in the game, and I'm sorry if this spoils this for anybody, was Frank left Bill and killed himself. We did not get much of this story. This was basically a side quest with some, disparate information. In the show, Frank never meets Ellie. Bill never meets Ellie, but in the video game, Bill meets Ellie. And there's an interaction between the two of them, pivotal to the game and pivotal to things that happen in the story that I'm not going to spoil for you guys, but we get this. This is part of the game. So inevitably, there's been mixed reactions on this. But to be clear, 99.9% of them have been positive. Fans of this game are very progressive, very inclusive, very pro gay, lesbian, and trans narratives. And arguably enough, the few criticisms that did come out were mostly from people asking, well, why didn't you follow the original story of the game? Because there were pivotal interactions in the story that we kind of wanted to see on the big screen. Or the small screen, depending on how you want to describe it. So inevitably, outside of people like Ben Shapiro, who, is an asshole conservative, who seems to be bizarrely afraid of intimacy and thinks that everything should be, miserable, inevitably, this was going to come out. And what you're seeing on the screen right now next to me is a post from Neil Druckmann, and I believe the show writer. I'm not 100% sure. This might just be Neil Druckmann himself. So I'm going to read the thing for you verbatim first, before I go over a few things. So the post begins. I made the mistake of reading other people's comments about The Last of Us. Many masking their homophobia with, why can't it stick to the game? Others just straight up not wanting lesbian, gay, bi, and queer representation in mainstream media. I have two thoughts about this. One, who on earth wants a shot-for-shot remake? If I wanted that, I'd just play through the game again. I want an adaptation. I want TV film to play to their strengths and give me an alternative take. Delve into the human condition. Spend more time with the character. Otherwise, what's the point? Point two. The Last of Us's lead is Ellie, not Joel. Ellie is gay. This hasn't been retroactively added. This was further explored in the Left Behind DLC, which was released in 2014. This is and always has been a progressive series. Bill was gay too. This is a faithful adaptation. If The Last of Us is a little too diverse progressive for you, I think you need to stop watching. It's been their story since 2014. There are countless stories which avoided representation altogether. I don't know what to tell you. Watch them instead. Okay. So first of all, we need to say this again. The audience for this game was never homophobic. Never anti-gay. If anything, the audience that surrounds the media that represents this game is unusually more progressive than most. The video game industry in general and its fans are very progressive people. We have no problem with queer representation in media. So then we get to the concept that this is all homophobia. I challenge you to find a fan of this game that is a misogynist, a homophobe, anti-trans, or anti-gay. It just doesn't exist. Again, the reaction to this episode was bizarrely positive, even from people who are not necessarily proponents of queer representation in media, who are not necessarily allies, who just want good stories in media. They loved this. All you have to do is look at the reactions on YouTube from React channels. Channels that don't necessarily find this stuff meaningful. Across the board, the reaction was amazingly positive and amazingly heartfelt. So now I'm going to go over his bullet points. Who on earth wants a shot-for-shot remake? Well, to be clear, Neil Druckmann himself said that they were going to be remaining very faithful to the source material. Something that people like myself and others were looking forward to, given the horrible train wreck that was the Halo adaptation and the second season of The Witcher. Because as we learned very creatively, when you have very clearly that when you have creatives with their own agenda, they want to infuse their own beliefs and morals and systems of creative control into a property that's already written and laid out for them, it usually goes off the rails. It usually doesn't end well. Halo was horrible. The season 2 of The Witcher left a really sour taste in a lot of fans' mouths. I want TV to play to its strengths and give me an alternate take. Yes, exactly. There was so much that due to the structure of a video game, you could not tell about the characters in The Last of Us. We were thirsty as hell for this, for the fleshing out of characters and stories. The way the outbreak began was fleshed out so much more in the television adaptation than it was the game. We loved this. I loved this. I want TV and film to play to their strengths and give me an adaptation to delve into the human condition. Yes! Yes! That is what we want. Bill's story in the game was a side note, arguably a very bad depiction of a gay relationship, where when it fractured, one of the parties went and killed themselves. Is that the story that we wanted to be? That rote story of the tragic gay couple that's dysfunctional. Nobody wanted that. What we got instead was beautiful, well written, humanized. Which, oddly enough, when you tell people not to watch this, goes against what you want. You want people to watch this. You want people who don't necessarily have an exposure to queer relationships to understand that, yes, this is normal. They're no different from you. So then we get on to the second bullet point. And this is the one that pisses me off the most, because it follows a trend in media that I'm going to go over very soon. The Last of Us's lead is Ellie, not Joel. No. Ellie and Joel are co-leads in the video game. Ellie would not exist without Joel. Joel is a moral center. And he learns to take the parts of him that were cut off by the events in the video game and open himself back up to people. We see that relationship starting in the television show. For you to come around and say Joel is not a lead character betrays everything that the video game was. Then we get Ellie is gay. Yes, we are aware of this. Everybody knows this. But to be clear, that was not a central focus of the first video game. It was portrayed in DLC and then much more as a central role in the second game, where arguably Neil Druckmann's narrative decisions betrayed both the character of Ellie and the character of Joel, and included some very suspect and weird trans representation. But I'm not going to focus on that, because what I am going to focus on is this noticeable trend in media lately of taking established white male characters and destroying them, cutting them down, making them weak, making them regretful, making them petulant and irrelevant, and betraying the people that they were. We saw this notably with Luke Skywalker in the Star Wars prequels. And now here we are again, in arguably one of the best told stories in video games. Why would you betray a central character in this way? Why would you go and tell your fans Joel is not a central character? So then we get the other quip. Bill is gay. Yes, we know this. But how we found out about it in the game was basically a side quest. And I understand, in video games, you need to make choices, narrative choices, about how the flow of a video game is going to go. Because video games, believe it or not, mostly centralize around a form of combat. And the story takes center stage to a degree. You can't focus on every character. You can't flesh out every story. We as fans were craving that in this. This is what we want. We don't necessarily want a one-note adaptation of the video game. But I do understand where fans of the video game said, hey, there was an interaction between Ellie and Bill. Ellie does not meet Bill in this adaptation for television. But in the video game, she does. There are interactions and formative things that go on in the story between them. So I can understand fans questioning a decision like this. But I challenge you to find a fan of the game that espoused homophobic rhetoric in regards to asking just a simple question as to why did you make this creative decision? And we see this on and on again. When you start questioning things, right away you're labeled a misogynist, a homophobe, a racist. Oh God, it just doesn't stop. And I don't know why creative leads do this. Is the media attention that are you that desperate for it that you need to throw your fan base under the bridge? Disney did this with Star Wars fans. Star Wars fans cross almost 3 generations. And as soon as they questioned creative decisions, they were labeled racists and homophobes and misogynists. It was an unbelievable barrage of stupidity on behalf of the creatives at Disney. Please don't do this, Neil Druckmann. Please don't do this, because to be absolutely honest with you, you don't have a great past of representation in your games. I won't go over exactly the entire plot of the second game, but you made some very suspect decisions in terms of trans representation in that game. But here we are. And I want to be clear to everybody watching this video right now. Whether you are pro-gay or trans or not, whether you play video games or not, whether you are a mass consumer of media or not, if you like good, meaningful stories that don't preach to you, that don't throw social agendas in your face, I challenge you to sit down and watch exclusively the third episode of The Last of Us and record your reaction for us. Because I think you would be very surprised by what the narrative in this story does to you on a personal and emotional level. Because it is so relatable, regardless of your gender, your sexuality. It spans all that. It supersedes all that. It brings the story down to a human, relatable level. And I am tired, so damn tired, of creative leads that cannot take and maturely address criticism. Because that's all this is. The very few threads of homophobic rhetoric that you saw in regards to the reactions of this mostly came from people who live in countries where trans gay representation is non-existent, where that outlet is repressed on a religious and social level. Can you be that mad at these people for the reaction? No. And if anything, telling them not to watch is the worst thing you can do, because they need to be exposed to this. This was the best way to provide a bridge to understanding. Better than the movie Philadelphia, better than the movie Bruce, better than any form of queer media that I have seen where the gay couple is portrayed as either dysfunctional or one of them dies by the end of the movie, with no meaningful fleshing out of their relationship. This was amazing. And of course, the creative leads are going to deflate all of this by coming out with statements like this. I'd like to hear your opinions, like and subscribe. Thank you.